joining in. So we have Espen Gatzfeldt, the initiative taker and more or less the Nordic Bank chairman and chairperson for with the background and interest to share this very important theme as well for the ecosystem. So Espen, great to have you on board, and if you could maybe do us the pleasure and opening up with the background of what led behind this interesting theme.
Yes, thank you, Smiko. So basically, some 3 years ago, I had a fellow investor that he had been the CEO of a successful Danish company. They have exited it and had a lot of success. Then he made some money, and somehow he managed to gear his investments in a way that he lost everything. And he started in the last months up till he committed suicide with like doing some things that there were a lot of people that liked him and trusted him like we do by nature in Denmark. And then somebody started to say, oh, you can't really trust him now, and he did this and this was not okay. And so people started to pull away from him business-wise because somebody said, oh, you can't trust him and he's doing this stupid thing over there. And so actually he called me 1 month before he committed suicide, and he said, oh, I have this office and I can't use it and it's too big for us now, and do you need another office and can you take this? And I was also like, no, I'm sorry. And I was kind of cutting the conversation, not in a rude way, but I was like, we didn't need another office. And then 1 month later, I got this very sad message that he had taken his own life. And then I attended the funeral, and there were like 300 people, and I think everybody was having this like, oh, could we have done something? And the whole like guilt, and is there something I could have done differently? And like seeing his kids on the front row in the church, and it was just terrible. And then half a year later, a friend of mine, he was on the board of another startup with 10 employees, and he was asking me, do you know some investors and anybody that wants to invest in this type of a company? And to come to the end, the board managed or choose to close this company down, and this was too tough for that founder. So he also committed suicide, and then I was like, what the fuck? What we need to like? This is terrible. So I was doing some press in Denmark and thinking like, what can we do about it? And so of course I'm aware now that, okay, do I know some startup founders or some people that are under pressure? But really the reason for taking this initiative was like, what can we do now? We know that there is this Corona crisis and there will be more companies going bankruptcy and a lot of stress and pressure for entrepreneurs. So I was like, what can we do? I've given it some thought, but I'm very curious to hear from the rest of you. And so this is basically the background behind so of course the dream is that with our joint effort we would be in a situation, let's say in 10 years, where there would be people that would have been pushed to the edge that somehow didn't choose this terrible solution of finishing their own life. So that's the important topic that we're discussing now.
Thank you so much, Espen, for sharing this. And I must admit, this is one of the toughest themes so far been joining in. So I must admit I'm a bit nervous as well about how the discussion will take place, and in a very positively way that it's in uncomfort zone. So this is at least a theme in my bubble, as I mentioned in some of my close ones, that I haven't heard about similar kind of activities here in Finland, where I'm mainly active, and of course these examples shared by you in Denmark, so that is just terrible. And maybe one of the main reasons, as we now head into a fall, which we all know is going to be quite interesting economically for all these kind of businesses, but especially for startups and those involved. So as it is a high risk business, how will we make sure that it's considered only business and not going to the extreme, which is of course affecting many ones and close ones as well. So hopefully we can have some this is, as we discussed, and this is, we don't have the answer. We, of course, know that this is a human issue, and being close and calling each other is one way to do it, but we would love to just open the discussion and make it less uncomfortable in the sense to take up this also important topic that might be part of the times to come. But yeah, so without further ado, as I see Hampus Jakobsson has joined in, so not an easy part to join in as well. So maybe Hampus, if you can unmute and see if you can join in the discussion.
Absolutely. I can't turn on video for some reason. It's disabled for the host, from the host.
But it is. I'm sorry about that. That's my technicality. So we'll do, but we rely on the word, and we'll be sharing the discussion. So when we welcome Hampus as well, and we have some comments and questions, and the theme is more or less to share some of the experiences you as active angels have as investors, and of course your role and views as entrepreneurs as well. How to cover enduring crisis, and how can we support and help, what to consider when being in contact with other entrepreneurs and investors. But Hampus, maybe you could start with a short also your view and activity related to this theme.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is I think it's the pressure, as you shared, Espen, with your personal story. I think the problem is that I think that we have to remember that there's things that are way more important than the company we're building, and it doesn't have to be that kind of terminal outcome. It's just important to remember that people are parents, people are brothers and sisters, and people are children to somebody. And I think that if investors put the pressure on the entrepreneurs to build their business no matter what, we will definitely, even if we don't have as horrible situation as people taking their lives, we will have people who are damaged in a very extreme way. So I think one very important thing for me is to make sure that as investors, we make sure that we have a very open and honest channel with the people we invested in, so that they feel that they can tell us when things are not going well. They can essentially just say, I'm not feeling very well now because my dad is sick. That must be a very legit reason for us to be able to listen into. And a big part of that is, of course, also to make sure that we don't put the pressure on those people. So first of all, building a relationship that they can say, like, things are not really well. And secondly, that we tell people very, very kindly and honestly is that, hey, if things are off, I'm not going to force you to vest your stock. I'm not going to push you out. I'm not going to be a horrible person here. I think take care of your family. I mean, start by just taking a couple of days off and just like, let's talk in a week or so. Let's see where you land, and think about people as humans and not as products of printing money.
That is definitely. Thank you very much for sharing that. And is there, like, you mentioned more or less like how your role is towards your own company to your work with. So how about your own experience? Do you remember, does this come from your own experience, or is it something that more or less you've been sharing with your network?
No. I mean, both the companies I built were horrible to build. I mean, in one, I felt schizophrenic, I felt paranoid, I felt all the kind of diagnosis you can check if you get a Psychology 101 book. I felt horrible in so many ways. And the second company completely failed. And I think that the biggest thing was in the second company, I think I had much more perspective. Like in the first company was technically successful, it was just very painful. But with the second company, I think that we didn't succeed what we were let out to do, and we terminated in advance. And I think it was the greatest thing was that we as a team agreed, including with investors, that the best we didn't reach the best of outcomes, but we were made sure that we didn't reach the worst of outcomes. So we were very clear with the communication with investors saying, we have 12 months runway left. We don't think we're going to succeed where we want to go. We think we should dismantle the company and not try to push these last 9 months. And that was a very hard discussion. Some investors said, why don't you try to sell the company? Some investors said, like, why don't you try harder? And we as a team stood firm by, we said, like, we don't think we're going to make it. Like, we can't see how we're going to get an outcome, which is good. So why do it? Why not just terminate and hand you back as much money which is in the accounts?
Okay, so you feel like that example of your experience as well, like the investor relations wasn't maybe the, let's say, most ideal in the sense that you had to step up with your own vision and thought how it's going to go through. So you didn't get the support, at least from the investor perspective. We
got support from some investors. I mean, we had many investors, as companies do, both angel investors and institutionals. And I think that some of the institutionals were actually really good. I think the angel investors were more varied. So as an angel investor, you have put your own money on the line, money that you instead would have bought a boat for or something. So I think that, of course, you want your money back multiplied. Whereas if you're an institution, I think that, it's like, it's work. It's not that personal. So I think most of the institutions were really nice and helped us. And I think that the angels, there were a varied degree.
Exactly. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. So maybe we could do another Charlotte, for example. We know you have also a background with experience with this kind of as an entrepreneur as well. So maybe you would like to share similar to Hampus, your experience with the relations and balance with your team during the crisis.
Sure. Kind of as Hampus, I had two startup stories before I'm the founder of my current company. And the first one, it was my first time as CEO. I wasn't the owner of that company. I was kind of an external CEO, but it was in a very, very, very early phase startup. And we decided to fold that company a little bit on similar terms as Hampus mentioned, that at a point we just understood that we are just off on the market, and I couldn't see how we could become right. But as with Hampus, like there were, in that case, actually there were mostly angel investors and different types of angel investors. So I think for me personally, I mean, I felt, even though it wasn't my company, I didn't found it, I felt very much personally responsible for the state the company was in and the decisions that we had made. And it wasn't an easy decision for me to decide to step away, which I kind of choose to do because I didn't believe in it anymore. And there was, in that case, it was actually kind of good reactions, if you could have good reactions from a company folding, from the investors, in the terms of kind of them understanding, and we came to a good conclusion. And in the end, it was a mutual decision. But since it was my first time being a CEO and it was my first time kind of in an official leadership position, I think personally it was a hard thing to go through. And I can just kind of strongly remember like an elderly relative coming up to me after we decided to fold the company, and he kind of looked me in the eye and patted me on the shoulder, and he told me like, yeah, I'm really sorry, Charlotta, that you are bankrupt. And that was it was a good aha moment for me, because I remember looking him in the eyes and I was like, no, I'm actually not bankrupt. Like the company I've been working with, like the thing I have been investing a lot of passion and time in, that is bankrupt. But me as a person, I'm not. And I think that is something I kind of took with me from that point, how important it is to have this separation between what you do and who you are. And it doesn't mean that you don't care about it. It doesn't mean that it's not the thing that you eat and breathe and live. But there is a difference, both when it goes well, but also when it doesn't. And then my second experience was my most recent company I was with, where I wasn't a founder. I came in very early. And that company actually went really well. Like we did an amazing journey where I was the CEO. But in the end, one of the angels and I got into a conflict, and he kind of just threw me out. And I think from a personal perspective, that was definitely a worse experience than the first company. I think both because just of my level of investment in this and how much I cared about it, but also because it was twofold. Like one was, of course, that I weren't allowed to continue working with this thing that I loved and that I thought I would be doing for the next 10 years. But also because this angel, he decided to kind of go out very publicly and start kind of questioning my competence and a lot of very weird things. So I ended up both kind of losing the thing I loved, but at the same time ending up in this situation where people were reading about this and I knew I couldn't control what they were thinking. And it was very much connected to kind of me as a person. So that was an interesting experience going through.
Definitely. But that has led that to today you're once again upbuilding a company and strengthened by those experiences, if we understood correctly.
Yeah, but I mean, for sure. I think one of the most important things, at least for me personally, is to kind of keep being curious about myself. So, and with the separation of kind of you and what you're doing, it's often it's easier sometimes when it doesn't go well. Like it's not you who failed as a person, it's the thing you're doing. But it's actually as important to do when it goes well. Like when the company is doing well and everything is going fine, it doesn't mean that you have succeeded as an individual. It just means that the thing you're doing is actually seems to be working. So I think, but taking that step back and allowing yourself to see that sometimes I'm failing as a person, even though my company is doing well. And sometimes I'm actually succeeding as a person, even though my company is doing poorly. I think that that was one of the most important learnings for me. And it kind of made me keep like a healthy distance. And I do think that some, at least from my perspective, some of the investors that I've met, they don't really want you as an entrepreneur to have that distance, because we have this stereotypical image of what a successful entrepreneur is. And they are some guy, often a guy, that is completely almost crazy and goes all in, and there is no boundaries and there is no nothing. And I think when we start projecting that image to like full real people, you end up in something that you have to live up to this image of something. And I don't think that is healthy. And I don't think that we're building, it's not the best way to build successful companies, to try to force our entrepreneurs into a very, very small box like that.
Yes, that's a very, very good comment, and I'm very much associated with the startup community as well. That like this kind of extreme individuals, and of course those successfuls are the ones who are happy to be shared. So maybe, Espen, do you have how would you reflect on your role as an investor as well? Do you position yourself and do you discuss this in advance, and how do you at least see yourself mirroring to the experience that Charlotte has, for example?
Me or Esben?
Yeah.
Well,
You go, Marfak.
Okay. Well, I don't know where to start. I mean, my background, I'm a serial entrepreneur turned investor, was a VC for a while, and now with Nordic Makers and also doing on my own. So I used to be one of those crazies who worked like 100 hours a week, or 16, 18 hours a day, however you want to count it. And I never burnt out, but I think I was quite close to it. I have seen and met, and I know lots of people who have burnt out, and I kind of know in retrospect that I was very close, but I'm happy I didn't hit the wall. But I think the first learning from this is that you really need to know yourself. I mean, of course, people around you should identify these kind of symptoms, but it's really also about your self-awareness and knowledge of your own capabilities and limits. Because, I mean, especially as a young entrepreneur, you think you're invincible, and the culture around you is very much feeding on this invincibility. Like you work 1,000 hours a day or whatever month, and then you sleep under your desk because your competitors are doing the same, and you can't really just take holidays and all that. And it's a very, it can be really dangerous. Perhaps toxic might be the word. So the first thing is really know yourself and know your limits and what you're capable of. Sometimes you have to test your limits before you actually find out where the boundaries are. But as an investor, I think, having been on the other side, so I guess I was for 20 years an entrepreneur and now 10 years as an investor. I have this, I hope at least others would agree as well. I've developed something that I would call founder empathy. And I recognize that in some investors I work with, and I also recognize the lack of it in some investors I work with or I've met. So especially if you've been a founder yourself, you do understand the pressure and the stress that these founders and startup entrepreneurs are under or going through. And I think it's sometimes just, if they don't know their limits, it's up then to the investor to say that this is just a startup. It's not the entire life. And even if it doesn't fly, it's not the end of the world. And sometimes I've seen investors, Hampus mentioned that angels were tougher than institutions. I've seen it actually the other way, where institutions are not really, they don't care that much about individual companies because they are just managing a portfolio. And what this means in practice often is that when things are going well, they are your best friend. They come to the board meetings and they're supporting and they're calling you all the time. When things go south, they just stop calling you because they kind of write you off and they spend more time on the more promising companies. And that's, I think, something which I find unacceptable. I understand that people, I mean, sorry, I could go on and on, but I
was just going to say, Mofak, I think that at the same time, I agree with you, but I think that sometimes what's good with institutional investors is that if you're not looking like you're going to be the thing that's going to soar to the sky, as you said, they ignore you. Yes. And the thing is, that means that you can pretty much decide on your own. They don't call you and support you, but they kind of ignore you. I think that the tricky thing with the angel investors is the angel investors might want to see you just give them the money back. So I think the scary situation with angels, they can kind of say, can't you sell the company just for, like, sell it for €1 million to get us some money?
Let me iterate on that. I agree with that. But I think the difference here is in the timing. The institution typically might write off the company before it's actually dead. Or ready to go under. So
absolutely,
I mean, at least sometimes I've been in cases where we've managed to save the company gracefully when the institutions have kind of just left. And I think you kind of owe that for the entrepreneur to be there also when the bad times hit. You can't just be a good weather investor.
I 100% agree. And I think the scary part is when you realize that you're not the most beautiful girl in class anymore or something, and you realize they just ignore you. And that's really a shitty situation as well.
Yep.
I would love to add one thing to that too. Like, at least from my experience with angels, I would say, and this is definitely not for all angels, but the bad ones, if I would say it like that, one of the challenges that they are often... they are not very good at separating what they're doing and who they are. So when something goes well, then they think it's their success. And when it doesn't go well, they don't want to see it as a failure, basically. So at least from my perspective, the angels that has been hard for me to work with is the ones that they don't really care how it goes for you, maybe with the company, but they care very much on how it reflects on them. Okay. And they can't really separate kind of between who they are and what is going on. And that has been really hard to tackle. Like when you meet someone and you can kind of almost sense that this has nothing to do with us or the company. This is about you and your own stuff that is kind of going on. And this I haven't, like, I've never met that from an institutional owner, but I have met it from angel investors.
So for me, I've like, when investing in a company, I'm thinking, okay, I need somebody with this competence that I don't have, so I can help the company on this and this area. But let's say AI, that's not my competence. So I need to have an investor that have a business angel background in that, so that we can kind of support the company in all the areas that they need to be good at. But then I've seen sometimes that when the companies end in a crisis, then I find out, oh, I should have done a due diligence, not just on the like competence of the person, but also how is this person in a crisis? Because I'm surprised sometimes when shit hits the fan in the startup that, wow, value-wise, we are just like east and west. We are totally different in like what is the value here, and how do we treat the entrepreneur when they are in crisis? And actually, I think it's I've been surprised sometimes, like so nice people, and then suddenly you have a crisis somehow, and you see just like a beast coming out, and I'm like, shit, how could I know this? Or he's such a nice guy, and we're hugging all the time, and suddenly it's a crisis, and he's just really, really tough.
But I think it's also it's very much as Charlotta says as well. I think about that. I think the worst angel investors I've met are the ones that they're not worst angel investors. There's something else behind it. I think that they bragged about investing in your company in front of all of their friends at a dinner party, and now they just do not want to see that company fail, because then all of your friends next dinner party, all their friends is like, oh, I saw that company in the newspaper. Why are they not so smart now, right? So I think it's the separation that, like, this is how it works. Like, some companies end up being big and some companies don't. And just as Charlotte, I think it was really wise what you said as well, is that separating that when you're unsuccessful with a company, it's not you who are unsuccessful, but also when you're successful, it's not you who are successful. I think that's the complicated part. And I think the problem we do in the system is that as we're entrepreneurs, I mean, I spend a lot of time building companies, we do the same to our fellow entrepreneurs. Like when you sit down for that morning coffee with your entrepreneur friend and they're saying, how is it going? The first thing you're going to say is, we're killing it. It's amazing. Metrics are through the roof, yada, yada, yada. You're not going to say, damn, I wish I could just sleep more and work less right now, and not brag about 80 hours, but instead say the other way. Say, I want to get down to 40 hours. Like, I need to do this. You got to help me.
Excellent points, everyone. Maybe as more reflecting on as angel investor, it's the classic model has been a bit hidden market. It's been challenging maybe finding those, but as it's getting more transparent. So have you created, as you all doing investments as well, but how is it, is there a process then to do an evaluation of those potential co-investors or recommendation for entrepreneurs who to bring on board as investors? How to do that check of a good weather investor and a bad weather investor? Is there any good recommendations for the entrepreneurs now joining in?
So one thing I'm doing more and more is to take people for a very long walk, because then you get around corners and that's like 15, 20 kilometers together, and just having some hours to get to know people. But it's difficult.
I think that the classic kind of getting references, I think it still works. And trying to find references that aren't willingly given, in the sense like it, and everyone's, I mean, there is that personal experience, so you always have to take it as it is, kind of. But like asking, I've done this once when I spoke to an angel investor, and that is kind of asking them, like, who would give you a bad reference, and like, why would they do that? And just get them to speak about that, because I mean, it doesn't mean, I mean, no one is perfect. Like, everyone makes mistakes, and we make mistakes in relationships and of course in investments too. And as an entrepreneur, you make mistakes with employees and other things. But what kind of mistakes you're making and what you learned from those, I think that it might be the most important.
I 100% agree. References is 101 here. It's like the crazy thing. Think about the fact that when an investor invests in you, they do a lot of reference checks, right? So it's really strange that you as an entrepreneur, like, you're not doing reference checks. Of course, you have to do exactly the same. You have to check, and also remembering it's like it's not a firm investing in you. It's a general partner, or if it's an angel. So you might get a good logo type, but it's a person you're getting. So you have to get a reference for that person.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. It's at least in some countries like Finland, for instance, where some years ago there was very few investors and very little money. Now it's changed a bit, but you couldn't actually do any, or you could have done reference checks, but it was useless because there was kind of like asymmetry in the market. Very few investors, so you just took the money where you got the term sheet from. And I know companies who would say that we know that these guys are assholes, but we couldn't get money from anyone else, which I think is really, silly or stupid, I guess. But yeah, I definitely agree. And references from people who are not given as references, I think it's useless to ask references from the investor themselves, because they'll just give you the good ones. You need to do your own due diligence and find the ones who can get a bit more unbiased information or views.
I agree.
So one of the things, go Charlotte.
No, just gonna say, like, it's, I mean, as an entrepreneur, you can't be, sometimes you can't choose, but at least you know what you're getting. And I think in the end, like, it's all about relationships. And if you know the person that you're bringing on board a bit better, even if you can't choose, like you would have chosen someone else if you could, it might make it easier to interact with that person.
So one thing I've been thinking about the last years is like, okay, I can do something in my network, or I can be aware of the startups I know of and so on, but is there a systematic way to kind of make sure that people are doing well? So we have this national growth fund or Vækstfonden, it's called in Denmark, and I see they have this like early warning program where they somehow find out that, okay, these startups, they are coming close to something that could like be a crisis for them. So on the financial part, they have a way of approaching this type of startups. So I'm just thinking, is there something we could do as ecosystems in the Nordic to somehow, I don't know how it would look, but it's just like I can only reach those that I see. But yeah, I don't know if it's just an awareness thing about everybody should be aware of this. So doing what we are doing now and sharing this message is the best we can do, or if there is another chapter of basically writing the story of how we made sure that there was this place people went, or we found out and then we reach out to them, or I'm curious if any of you have any ideas, like also you that are listening in, please write your thoughts if you have something to share.
I think at least talking about these things is already a good starting point, because, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, no one spoke about failure in Europe. Bankruptcy was the end of the world. It was very stigmatized. And back in the day in Finland, if you had gone through a bankruptcy, it was basically you were considered a criminal, obviously not being in the face of law, but in like kind of the folk court, you were perceived as a criminal. Now it's changed, but still failure is not, I don't mean it should be celebrated or anything. Supercell, which you might know, this very successful Finnish gaming company, they actually celebrate more their failures, games that they kill, more so than games that ship and are successful. So kind of, I think you're also rambling here a bit, but there was this, probably you know about this very famous Google research that they conducted on the best performing teams. They tried to figure out what's the secret source. Is it education or IQ or some other factor? And the most important factor was actually psychological safety. The fact that the team feels safe and people feel like they can talk openly and express their ideas and comments, and no one is judging. And these are actually the common denominators of the best teams. So I think this could be applied also to a broader ecosystem type of discussion. So having like not stigmatizing people who talk openly about weaknesses.
I think that the super important thing for me there is, I don't know if people have followed and read the work of Brené Brown, but I think that Brené Brown for me is the person in the world who's done the best work on this. And that is really making sure to decouple the word vulnerability from the word weakness. Most people believe that if somebody says I'm vulnerable, they mean I have a weak spot, I'm very sensitive here, I'm easy to hurt. Vulnerable is the ability to be able to communicate your feelings. It's an amazing power. It's an extraordinary thing to say I'm afraid. Like, we all know we get goosebumps when somebody says something very honest about themselves that could make them, like, it exposes them. And I think that we really have to make sure that we tell people that by saying things that I don't know, or this is what I fear, that doesn't make them weak. It actually makes them strong. And the thing is, if people around them behave as if they said something stupid, of course, we're going to train everybody to not do it. So the important thing is make sure that to be vulnerable yourself. Read Brené Brown if you haven't read it, and find some people, like another CEO at a startup, one angel investor, one person at an institutional fund, even if they're not your investor, that you actually can talk to. I think one of the amazing things I think happened when you were kicked out, Charlotta, was how many people who were very disconnected from the company running actually reached out to you. Like, I mean, a big institutional investor who was not your investor reached out to you, which I think is very interesting. I think that it really showed how many people actually cared for you. And I think that was very strong. And that was because, of course, you were reachable, so to say. And I think that some people are not. Some people have put on their iron armor and say that they're better than everything else. And then they're not reachable.
I think it's a really good point. Like if I think both of them, like if we think about this both as an entrepreneur, but also maybe as an investor, like if our ultimate goal is of course for us to build successful companies, like if that is not our goal, then we should probably do something else. But then like what do we strongly believe? Like what do we believe is going to up the chances of that success? And I just kind of always come back to how I raise my children. Because it's so tangible and you care so much for them, right? You want them to be happy, balanced, successful in their own way kind of people. And at least from my perspective, what I've seen is the best way for me to help them to learn or to do good thing is to make sure that they do feel safe. Like if I stand and just yell at them, it's sometimes you need to do that too, but I know it's not going to be a teaching moment for them. So I think that kind of looking at ourselves, like when are we as most productive? And also maybe as an investor looking at the entrepreneur, like if I really want this company to succeed and I want this person to be as productive, as strong, as successful as they can, to kind of look at that and see what do I think I need to do to make that happen. And to realize that we are not the same, like everyone doesn't fit into one mold. We are different and we respond to things differently. And I think that can only come back to ourselves. Like we need to be curious about ourselves. Like when I feel I became defensive, you asked me something and I could sense myself that I became very defensive. To not only blame that on you, but also to be curious, like why did I react so strongly of you asking me about my MRR? So I think that it's a balance between ourselves and we as a community. I'm also rambling a bit, but.
No, but I think that as the community, I think that one thing I would fear is that if we put burden on the person who is in the horrible situation. I think another thing I think is super important is when you meet that entrepreneur, if you're an entrepreneur yourself, or if you're an investor, an angel investor or something, when you ask them, how are you? One of the things I think people should do more is saying, how are you? And they say, I'm fine. I think it's great to say, no, but seriously, how are you? Like, I mean, seriously, don't do this quickly, but like, how are you? I think that actually asking people, like, I mean, it's not easy, right? So giving space to people to say, well, I mean, it's shit. In many ways, it's shit.
Well, welcome to Finland, because that's actually, no, seriously, that's part of Finnish culture. When someone asks how you are, you actually tell them, wow, shit, it's been really tough and I have this problem with my foot and then my dog died and whatever. And usually foreigners are just they can't believe themselves, like this is not happening. I just asked politely because I should say how are you, and I don't really care how you're feeling. And Finns are very open on this. So
but that is an amazing point, right, Mofak? I think that is the other side of that. You shouldn't ask that question if you aren't actually prepared to listen.
Indeed.
Then it is better actually not to ask. Because I think every time you have to say that everything is fine, even though it isn't, that is when you're killing yourself a little bit.
Yeah, yes. That lie is really damaging. Yeah. Having to live in multiple worlds is one of the hardest things when you're an entrepreneur, because you live in one world which is the truth and one world you're telling other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have lately been having a lot of fun asking people when I meet new people. I've asked like, so who are you? And then some people, they just do like the normal thing, and then some people like, oh, that's a big question, and I have no idea, and so.
Maybe Espen, and your main ask also for this discussion was like, what are the thoughts and maybe next steps and how to help? What could be the outcome and just Hampus mentioned just discussing this. It's already a step forward. Do you, Espen, feel that now we have some of the cultural experience from Finland, that there is the acceptance, a better acceptance of failure than it previously, and answering honestly what the opinion is. Do you feel that in Denmark, for example, is the culture, how do you see for today, your co-investors on the angel level, are they feeling comfortable in talking about, let's say, the upcoming times when financial situation might get more harsh? So do you see that it's more comfortable in the Danish culture?
I don't know. I've noticed one thing, and it is that it's really nice to have more female investors, because they kind of seem a little more soft and like emotional, and yeah, so sometimes it's just like having 6 men around the table in the boardroom. It's just sometimes rather tough, and coming from a tough culture. So I think in many ways this is an area where I think entrepreneurs would do better if we had more female investors. I'm overgeneralizing, but I've met very nice, females that, yeah. But I can't say that it's different than 5 years ago. But yeah, I have some boards and some things I'm working on now where I think, oh, it's too tough, and we are too tough on the founder, and how to kind of balance that and make sure that he's not getting under too much pressure. And when he's in a tough time, how can we support him? And of course, it's natural that the investors, they would think that, oh shit, maybe we lose all our money, so we are angry, and you're not delivering, and you told us how good it would be if we gave you money, and it's just so I think what's on my heart is like saying, okay, the worst thing is not losing the money. The worst thing is if a human being is basically burned out, or like it's good that it's in very few cases, but ending up taking their own life. So yeah, you don't want to miss a father. You can, yeah.
Maybe you can just remind your co-investors that, I mean, if they actually want to get their money back, like having the entrepreneur survive, I'm not talking like taking their life, but actually being kind of well enough to produce as good as possible, is probably the best chance for them to get their money back. And I think it's something that we forget. Like, you're not going to be your best. You're not going to make the best decisions. You're not going to do the best for your team or your product if you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're not having a balance in energy. And I'm with Mofak. I think you can work a lot of hours. I don't think it's about that. It's about kind of having a balance in your energy, so you can do those hours that you do need. Like, it's not an 8-to-5 job to be an entrepreneur. But if we want to optimize the outcomes, I do think that having healthy entrepreneurs, it should be part of that.
I think actually another view, or same but different, how I see this is it's a long game, like really long game. And I had that problem sometimes talking to other investors that I used to work with, that they were investing in companies and I was investing in people. And I continue doing that. So for instance, I've invested in companies which didn't go anywhere, but the next company of that founder might go really far. And I have a few examples of those. So I don't know, maybe I just have nothing else to do and I just spend a little bit too much time helping these founders, but I'm actually, I think it's worth the investment of your time to spend with these entrepreneurs, even if they're not going anywhere, because their next company, they'll remember when they start their next company, and they come back to you or they don't come back to you.
I totally agree.
That is very true. And well, then, if there's been very, very interesting points, and for those attending, and feel free to share your comments in the chat as well, or questions. We're happy to bring those on board as well. But it seems like it's more or less for your ask for how do we bring up this team so we don't have more of those unfortunate experiences that you had so far. So more or less, you would maybe the local community from the investor side should also be able to and willing to take this tough theme and discuss that in public. And maybe another, do you see this discussed in the local media? Has it been noted somehow? Maybe Espen Hampus, have anybody seen an example of discussing this extreme?
I would not expect media to get this, because the problem is, like, media is still on the level where if you're building a company and you are successful building that company, scaling it quickly, media will still write stuff like whatever, Spotify 5 years ago. Spotify is still not profitable, loses 50 million euro per year. It's like, oh, please, mainstream media, don't you understand they're losing 50 million euros because they're scaling quickly? So me expecting mainstream media to be able to communicate how not accelerating could actually be not a bad thing. I have no expectations of mainstream media. I think it's impossible. I think that this comes to people in the ecosystem. You as your entrepreneur, how you're telling your story. You as a fellow entrepreneur, asking your fellow co-entrepreneurs how they feel about it. You as an angel investor, not being hard when you don't have to be hard, and you reaching out and saying, how are you? And you as an institutional investor saying, hey, I mean, come on, there are more important things than this company. If you feel like this, like, come on, take a break. Like, let's not run you into the wall. But there are more important things.
So one trend I've started noticing in Denmark is that as the startup ecosystem is growing, it seems like there is coming a new industry of again, actually mainly female coaches that I've talked to several that are like, how could I coach some startup founders, and how could we work on some investors that it could be a part of the investment and the budget, and kind of the future of working with startups that you set off like 1% of the budget or something for like mental health. And so I think it's getting more and more on the agenda. And as you said, Muafaq, with Finland 10 or 15 years ago, it's definitely a different thing now. So I think we are in a movement of changing, but there's still a lot to do. But that's how it is. It's like going to war. It's kind of the same running a startup. If you have to hire people and grow very fast, then it's pretty crazy. Yeah.
It's one angle also to this is that this is not for everyone. I was once selected the worst salesperson in Helsinki in my previous career. And I like to bring the bad things or the negative aspects of anything to the table. So, for instance, if I've been interviewing people for some jobs, I usually tell the bad things about the job. And the same thing with if I'm like mentoring like young entrepreneurs or wannabe entrepreneurs or students in some accelerators. I typically tell them the bad things about entrepreneurial life and startup life, and one of the key points I usually say is that if you have big difficulties in coping with constant uncertainty, maybe this is not for you. If you need to know where you're going to be 6 months from now, or you cannot live with this that you might go bankrupt in 3 months from now, it is really difficult to cope with that, and perhaps not the best career option.
Are there people like those? But
I think there are. I think there are. I think that the thing is that I think it's super important though not to put this on a ranking scale that the best entrepreneurs that those that are stupid and crazy. But I think it's just as partly as you're saying also, Muafaq, it's just like there are different kind of companies, but there are also different kind of investors. I actually usually tell people before I invest in them saying, I just want to be very clear. I don't think we're a good fit because I am the kind of person that's going to drive you crazy because I'm going to be messaging you at 11 p.m. in the evening and saying, oh, by the way, how can I help out? Or like, as Charlotta said, I'm going to be the person who replies to everything, as Charlotta knows, saying, oh, by the way, why wasn't there an MMR chart in it? I'm going to try to sound nice, but I'm going to ask why there isn't an MMR chart. The thing is, I'm going to be very clear to people. It's like, I'm not for everybody. Like, I'm not going to be a douchebag, but I will be, like, we're going to the Olympics. So I will be the person saying, hey, and the thing is, if people are responding, hey, I don't want to go to the Olympics, I'm going to be fine. But I think it's super important that we talk about it. Like, is this the Olympics or is the local league? But let's talk about that thing.
But I think you can, like, if you know genuinely that something, like someone is saying something because they want the best for you, then you can say almost anything. And I think it's that kind of genuine wanting it to make you better, that is what is a telltale sign. And you will see through that. Like if someone tries to hide something that is actually just them being nasty behind them trying to help you, then it often becomes very clear. But the opposite is also true. Like, so I think it has to start with you actually wanting, like truly wanting the entrepreneur to do better. And I think I just want to kind of add that, I mean, I do think that diversity in these ecosystems, it is an important part of it. But I think that it's, you find kind of, at least from my perspective, I found very nice, empathic people on kind of all walks of life, men and women. But I think the common thread is that they are okay with not knowing that you're not perfect. Because if someone wants to believe that you're perfect and your company is perfect, then you're going to get pushed into a corner, because no one is and no company is. So I think kind of diversity, but also diversity of opinion. I think that is kind of absolutely an important part of it.
But I think you're saying something important here, Charlotte, because when I think of the most successful startups in Denmark right now, let's say like Mette Lykke from Too Good To Go or Jeppe from Pleo, being the CEOs of those companies, they are portrayed as supermen and superstars. And this is actually very far from the truth, because to your point, like, nobody is perfect. So they are good in these areas, but they need somebody here to support them. But that's not how they're portrayed. They are like the gurus.
Yeah, I think
so that's
that's
an
super
unhealthy
important.
picture.
Yeah, I think that I was just gonna totally agree with you, Espen. I think that I usually jokingly say when entrepreneurs are saying I'm a bit of like, I wish I was more like Elon Musk. I used to work with an entrepreneur who said that, and I said, "Oh, do you mean that you call British divers pedophiles on Twitter? Is that what you want to be like?" And the thing is, like, no, Elon Musk is not a very mentally healthy person. Like, it's too, and he's not a hero. And I mean, in certain aspects, of course, he's a hero, but he's not a god or anything. I think it's super important that we remember that we all have flaws, and it's super important. One of the things I at least try to do when I talk to entrepreneurs is, like, I try to highlight my flaws very early so that they can learn that it's okay that they expose their flaws. Because when you're in a power position, like an investor are, if you're the person that says, like, I'm perfect, then they expect you to be perfect as well. But if you're the person saying, I'm sorry, I was just fighting with my daughter last night, I'm super, super tired, that is, whoa, what? Then you maybe as an entrepreneur can say, oh, okay, I actually didn't sleep well either. And then, whoop, you're off to the races for a genuine conversation.
I have this thing I used to say, that Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs was one of the worst books that has ever happened to the startup community, because it kind of legitimized being an asshole, wearing a black turtleneck and being a total jerk. And I haven't seen that for a while now, but some years ago it kind of became almost like a modus operandi that people were wearing the same black thing, and they were also always behaving like really, really arrogantly, and it was really bad.
That is excellent. Finally, being with the black shirt here, so some self-reflection is
I have those
place.
As well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. But definitely, I think this has been a beautiful discussion. So maybe if I could ask all of you participants and then finalize with Espen. So maybe your last recommendation, summarizing the discussion we had so far. So now, because the fall looks so interesting times, so we have the support, especially in the Nordics, from the government. Now it's there's financial support possibilities, but then again, it still will that support the actual ecosystem to carry on and build prosperous business this time. So maybe, Marco, maybe you could start. What would be your last recommendation for your fellow colleague investors or entrepreneurs, what to consider for upcoming fall?
Well, I have a few points. One is know yourself. Second is read books by Basecamp guys. They are kind of questioning the venture model in a way. Like, you can build really. Sorry.
The David and the Danish gang.
Heinemar Hansson and Jason Fried. So you can build really successful companies, like super profitable, which is kind of, but still questioning the entire venture model, and the reason, the drive to grow and grow and grow, for any, like, as being the primary driver. I think those are my parting words here.
Thank you very much. We work with one of my favorite books, so that's a very, very good things to consider for this. And Charlotte, maybe yours finalizing recommendations for fellow investors and your entrepreneurs.
I'm going to repeat Mofax, because I think that is the most important one, to know yourself. And because you can't help others if you don't know kind of who you are or where you're going. So know yourself, and it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur or if you're an investor. To be curious about yourself, to try to learn about yourself and like what you need and how you're reacting and how you're projecting to others and so on. The second one would actually be kind to each other. I think it's to kind of give that benefit of a doubt when you hear both the amazing story, but also the bad one, to kind of take a step back and be curious and try to learn and be kind to the ones that are around you. I think that spreads, and I think it also makes it easier to be vulnerable, because you need to be that sometimes if you are facing kindness and not judgmental.
Thank you so much. And same goes to Hampus as well. Any final recommendations for upcoming fall?
To not add to just not saying +1, I would recommend also reading Brené Brown's Daring Greatly, because I think it's one of the best books written on exactly learning how to be vulnerable and learning how to understand that vulnerability is a super skill. It's not a sign of weakness or a weakness. But I think that echoing what previous panelists have said.
Actually, Claus Mikko, can you, if you're distributing a document here, can you add these book links? I think it would be valuable.
That I will do. I will send the whole document as well, summarizing the discussion, so everybody will receive that. So I'll make sure of that. So thanks for the recommendation. I will summarize them. Good. So thank you very, very much, Hampus, as well. And then, so Espen, it's hopefully this initiative is something that you felt good about and happy about the discussion. Any thoughts and final considerations for next how to? At least I feel a little bit less uncomfortable in talking about this very, very tough theme as we discussed earlier. But how do you feel?
So I really enjoyed the last hour on talks and inspiration. I think some of my key takeaways is like, it's not something we're gonna solve overnight. It's a culture thing. I was hit by how we portray the successful entrepreneurs. I think there's a lot of stories to be told on the human level. I remember at Tech Barbecue last year in Copenhagen, we started off with a failure panel by Danish unicorn founders, and so I think we should do more of this. Also your story, Charlotte, about like the first time and the second time, and then learning and like being close to burnout, and then you learn to live a much more healthy life, and so I think there's a lot of stories to be communicated in order for people not to feel that they are the biggest hole in, or that they shouldn't be here on this earth because they are failing. So there's a lot of shame we need to get out of failing in startup world. Thank you.
And it's crazy to think about. Think about if anybody tries to win in the Olympics and they fail, who would shame them? Who would say, "Oh, you tried to join the Olympics and you didn't get a medal"? Ha! They would say, "God damn, you tried. That was amazing."
That's true. But reading Andre Agassi's biography, he's like, "I'm playing tennis because my father wanted me to play tennis." So there is very deep, shameful stuff going on there because he hated playing tennis. It was all about his father.
Totally.
So. And the same with, I think, with our Bjarne Riis, the bicycling guy that won Tour de France and doping and all of that. I think there's a lot of father issues there as well. So it's like, how do you become a superstar by playing and not by being trained very, very, very hard without love? So it's deep things, some of this.
Very good. Thank you so much. So to summarize, so thank you so much. Hopefully this is ongoing and then opening up of discussing this theme. It's going to be, now we're going to enjoy a part of hopefully a sunny summer between, and then let's see how the year will turn out. But let's be kind to each other. Let's be open and have the brave to be vertical. And maybe I could end up with a text that reads on our wall as well from our moving person, Tuva Jansson, who wrote the main thing in life is to know your own mind. So that's a practice we all should more or less try to keep up with and not take the pressures made by ourselves. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining in, and hopefully have an excellent day. And I will end up the discussion at this point. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.